was a great deal of cost that showed up in the process, because in order to invest in scanning, there's a great deal of infrastructure. So you need these expensive scanners, and you got to have a very deep technical backbone to make this all work, and you have to have integrated workflow with other people's electronic workflows, and the quality has to be at a certain level, and the speed has to be fast enough for processes to work, because if the old process was split the file into many parts and send it to many departments, the new process was convert it into an electronic loan file, put it in one electronic repository, and give many people access to it. So therefore, everybody needed to be able to see it at the same time. Why did we form this document management group, and why did we choose Lean? Well, as we started to do this, we had processing disconnected amongst a bunch of different groups. We said, let's put these groups that are causing all this cost together and see if we can find an efficient way to make this work. Let's improve this technical infrastructure, because everybody was growing it in their own department in their own way, and the processes were becoming sort of disparate across different groups. And at the same time we were doing all of this, the 9/11 event happened in the United States, and in order to respond to that, the federal government dropped interest rates to a new record low, and in the same 5 days, everybody in the United States decided to refinance their loan. Probably many people in this room, right? So when that happens, if you think about it, we're not the only mortgage company. There's obviously many of them out there, but we hold a major part of the market in Wells Fargo. I've heard things from 1 in 12 homes in the United States that have mortgages we hold them for on average. But everybody calls at the same time and says, I want to refinance my loan. We only had the call centers explode. Everybody's taking applications. You might have experienced with different companies long lead times on how to get into the application process. And as that's happening, that's firing document generation engines all over the place, and people are creating files, and files are going to settlement agencies, and all these files are building up out there. People are executing these documents, and suddenly we realized in one of our operations centers in Minneapolis that we actually had to hire police officers to manage the traffic in downtown Minneapolis, because the semis full of paper were backing up into our office, and we were blocking traffic. And we were not really prepared for that. We had never seen a refinance wave in the organization or in the industry ever that big. Nobody had before. And our old process of getting more photocopiers and expanding the process even further by making more paper was simply not going to work, and we knew we needed to do things differently. So we merged departments into a single division. When we did that, we weren't sure all the work that everybody did that had grown up in different departments over years was still all valuable, so we needed to go back and look at it from a lean perspective and say, where's value? We had many, many handoffs between departments. We had many departments that handed paper between each other, so that each department would check their own work and then hand it to the next group, and they would check their own work, and then they would check it before they sent it to the next department. So we had all these handoffs and checks in between. We didn't have place for the paper, so we had to store it in all kinds of locations and even off-site. And then we weren't sure about what our defect rates were, because we had never pulled these groups together before. Each individual department had measured in a particular way, but we didn't have a normal measure for the work we were doing in a rolled-up way. And then because of this and all the paper that was happening out there and the fact that we had to handle it in different locations, we had to respond to the loudest priority. So we weren't sure always where our biggest problems were until somebody called and said, we need the Simpson file or the Johnson file, can you find it? And then we had to send a team of people out to look for it. It was not a fun place to work. But it was typical for the mortgage industry. And most mortgage companies to this day still do a lot of work this way. Get more people, get more photocopiers whenever there's any kind of a boom. So where did we start? The typical ways, and some of the slides that we go through here, I'm going to go through rather quickly. They're just meant to show you, or at least maybe they're meant to show us that we did learn something along the way, even though we weren't manufacturing people. So we started value stream mapping our process, and we didn't have a lot of expertise in that, so we brought in some outside help. Bo Keat, who some of you may know, came in, did value stream mapping, and taught us how to do value stream mapping, more importantly. In addition to that, we had some other engineering people that came in and joined our organization. And in a couple of instances, we had to talk them into it. Some of them were concerned that if they left manufacturing and went into a bank, that they would somehow later have to explain the gap in their career because it wasn't anything that they could hang their hat on. But we got past that too. So we made our process obvious. We started connecting things and making things more obvious by taking down walls, getting stuff out of rooms, putting people next to each other that needed to do work rather than having them in separate areas in a very simple way, just by putting them next to each other. And then we didn't have a model for everybody to gravitate to say, what are we trying to do here? What does this look like? So at the leadership team, we started to build what our model looked like around operational excellence and how we were going to communicate that to the rest of the staff. And at the same time, we were sort of trying to figure out how we're going to use this lean thing as well. So mapped our process, thought about it, started doing Kaizen events, typical things. We made our process obvious, physically connecting things. And we started with 5S standardization in our workplace, which is something that we'd never done before, and said, this is, if we have mountains of paper, and we're getting mountains of paper every day, and it all comes in packages, and we have mountains of garbage, there's an opportunity for us to mix and merge this stuff. So we had to 5S our whole office environment. At the same time, we started to make some cultural changes around depersonalizing our office space a little bit and making more universal workstations for people rather than each person having their own cube everywhere. And you'll see some of that later in the second presentation as well. You'll see examples of that. And our operational excellence model was for visual reference, so people knew where we were going. At the same time, we started trying to figure out what types of trainings we needed around lean or operational excellence to get people in a mode of understanding how this all fits together. And so we started with a whole bunch of different kinds of trainings, everything from making paper airplanes and showing how batching would work or not work, to bringing in experts from outside the company and having them do particular trainings, creating our own training. We just sort of seasoned the whole group with a lot of different training to find out what we really needed. That was sort of our first step in the process. The other thing we did was we started creating production teams, making these groups work together that were previously different departments. So we did a continuous improvement process, identified goals, mapped it out, found waste. We created a present value stream map. You can't read this, it's not important. It's just sort of our first generation of value stream map. We created a future value stream map. We said, okay, we can identify some waste. We learned some things along the way. Now we're ready to maybe propose something. We went out and looked at the floor and said, here's our spaghetti diagram. This is one particular process that we had. It flowed all over the floor. We said, well, maybe there's a better way to do this with this water spider or milk runs. We've chosen the word milk runs in order to keep people more focused on their work. So we came up with this design and we said maybe it could look like this. And we thought we could do something very radical to try and begin to teach the concepts of flow in our group. And what we did is we brought some conveyors into the bank, into our operations. Now that this isn't a front office bank, but into our banking operations, we actually brought some conveyor belts and said, maybe if we line people up in a particular way and then balance the workload between staff members, and we put these conveyors in, and there was a big cultural shock. People said, conveyors? Now we're going to have conveyors? I went to school to be a banker, and I thought I would get a cube and I would work and I would do smart banking things, and now I have to sit in front of a conveyor. This doesn't seem right. We said, hey, this is all operations, and we needed a way to communicate that more of what we were trying to do, and I'll share some of our results of that. So we made a transformational timeline. We said, hey, we're going to do this thing. We're going to take this and run it out onto the floor, and we're just going to start trying it. We're going to do it in 12 weeks and see what happens. And we did. We put it out. We started to connect things together. We changed the way we did work. We took away the cubes from everybody and lined up chairs and started to do this in a different way. And can you imagine what happened? We were viewed as the unfriendly management trying the next thing. So what did we learn? People had to envision their efforts fitting in to something bigger. They kept asking why. We found that the staff really knew what to do, and they could fix most of the stuff. if we asked them. In order to be successful, everybody has to contribute. We had people sort of opting in and out, trying to figure out if it was the right thing to do, but we needed everybody to really contribute, so we had to find a way to get them to contribute, not to make them contribute. Leadership needs to be in and spend dedicated time on the floor. We used to do this from our offices and our conference rooms, and we'd read graphs and charts and say, that's a very important problem that we see that happened over this 30-day period, and what are the odds that it's still happening that way? Well, we'd go out and try to figure out, right? But meanwhile, some other new problem was showing itself in the process. Batching work was a natural thing people did. We also learned that if you couldn't tell abnormal from normal processing, or if you didn't know you were meeting production, you didn't have standardized work, and you needed to do something very serious about that. Actually, we found standardized work was at the crux of what we really needed to build upon, and we didn't figure that out until later. And then check and adjust are just as important as plan do. So we were in a plan do cycle. We saw things that we thought we needed to do. We just went and did them, and then we went to the next thing, and then we went to the next thing. And we were just fighting fires all over the place. And we realized sort of this Toyota mantra of plan, do, check, adjust, put countermeasures in place, watch it for a while, keep testing it, make sure it's really good, test it again, ask people if it really works. Okay, maybe you're ready to move on to the next thing now. What did we adjust? So we built a training strategy. So we started to get smarter about our training rather than doing just all kinds of different training, as that was sort of test for us as well. We put our model together, and I'll show that to you in a minute, and we put the training modules together so they fit in a coherent way into our operational excellence model. We did it at all levels, showing the batching, the problems with batching, how you batch defects, and how we spent a lot of time talking about waste optimization and how we don't want to do that. We required managers to spend dedicated time on the floor. They had to go out and work on the floor, and the only way it happened was one of our leaders, who's coming up next, said, you're required to be on the floor this number of hours of the day. And people actually then got out of their desk and they started to be on the floor. We realized our standardized work problems. We started to work on those. And our operational excellence model became visible. It started to become visible to people. And then we started to add the cultural norms to it as well, because when we found we had this model together, there was a behavioral system around it that we need to make expressive as well. So this is the model that we put together.